This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host. And joining me today is Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Yes, and I'm actually just getting ready to. I've got my passport already in my pocket to head to Norway later today.
You've got your traveling clothes on.
That's right. I'm
ready to hit the long and dusty road across the Atlantic.
Boy, I tell you, it's the travel, even international travel, is heating back up again. So
certainly,
yeah. So it's going to be a long day trying to get in some podcasts here before.
Yeah, well, something that I know you love to do on long days is read long books.
That's for sure.
This podcast is going to be a book review, and it's going to be a book review of a very long book, of which you probably know the exact page count.
I do.
If I'm not mistaken.
I do. This massive tome sitting here right in front of me. As I kind of just flip here, I think it was like 1,276 pages.
Yeah, I thought you committed that to memory.
Yeah, well, I should.
Often drop it in.
1,276 pages if you count all the notes at the back. So
okay, which I'm sure you read.
Yes, of course. I'm sort of anal about that, but The Count of Monte Cristo, and a famous book written by Alexandre Dumas. Around 1844 or so. He also famously wrote The Three Musketeers, another popular book that I've never read either. And so
I don't think I have. Maybe we'll have to do that next.
I'm tempted to do that.
Saw the movie. I think,
yeah. So I don't know that we've reviewed very many books like this, but we're actually having our book club today as well. The lunch has already been ordered, and everybody will be gathering in our book club review. It's one of the first times we've just read a classic book like this.
Yeah.
And there's some debate these days about classic books. It can seem like a bunch of white dead men's kind of writing, and it's certainly the majority. Certainly not all. There's some great female writers as well, but there's books that have gone down and have been considered classics, and you can argue, well, they're considered classics because a certain segment of society reads them and declares them to be classics. But I don't want to go all the way down that rabbit trail to say we only think that these books are good because we've been taught that that's the kind of book that is good. But it's kind of like art. I think it is art, really. Where you can look at certain paintings and just say, well, just the use of the colors and the perspective and so on, the realism or whatever else, you look at certain things and say, okay, I may be biased, but that Van Gogh just looks a little better than what my 7-year-old grandson just did. I love my grandson. I may stick his picture on my refrigerator for a while, but it's probably not at the level of that Van Gogh. But Yes. And so there are just some books, I think, that history has declared to be classics, and they're typically classics not only because they're well written, even if they're really long, but they tend also to delve into human nature and the various struggles we have and the issues that we wrestle with, and that's typically what will put something as more of a classic instead of just kind of like a comic book kind of just action thriller. And it's the time, right? Like, it's a classic because it's sort of stood the test of time. Yeah, people are still reading it hundreds of years later even. Yeah. And so that says something. And so I try, each year, like I read the brothers Karamazov, however you say that. And I've tried to read some books like that are, mammoth books, but
some of the more Russian literature, you sort of think like, well, is this a classic because we're told it's a classic?
Yeah.
Some of those are pretty slogging to get
through.
They're good.
They'll go on some. They're not necessarily. Well, they seem like rabbit trails sometimes. There'll be a whole. You may go 100 pages on what seems like a sidebar sometimes, but And there's a few, like I haven't read Moby Dick yet, and I understand my nerdy
sidebars.
My nerdy son Daniel has read it and said that it could be a little tough slugging too. But Anna Karenina,
a good history of whales and Moby Dick.
A lot of people said Anna Karenina is considered one of the best novels of all time. It's been kind of rated like that. I've got it. I bought it so I could read it, but I've got a little shelf of classic books that just periodically I'll feel like, okay, it's time to jump in on that one.
Yeah.
And there is, I think, it's like appreciating great art. When you get yourself around stuff that is classic, that's considered some of the best of its genre, especially when it's addressing noble, major issues of life, I think it elevates your thinking. It elevates can just elevate you as a person sometimes as you just process that and you fill your mind with great thinking and great ideas. And sometimes even just having to read carefully and slowly just to make sure you understand what's going on. And it never hurts sometimes to quickly go to Wikipedia or something and figure out, okay, well, who is this philosopher that they just mentioned, or what is this Greek god that they just referred to? And sometimes that's good when you have to work through some of that. It's that doesn't hurt to do that. And so hey, this book's been out for 150 years. So if we're going to give away anything to you, you've had a long time to
be forewarned. Spoilers ahead.
Yeah, spoiler alert here. But at this point, you're kind of without excuse. But of course, this book is written by, and it's about a man named Edmond Dantes, who is just a very young man. He's naive, he's innocent, he's noble. He loves his girlfriend, Mercedes, and they're all set to get married. And he's a sailor, an officer for his ship, a merchant ship. He's good at what he does, and really it appears that he has a very bright future. He's marrying the love of his life. He's works for a great employer. He's skilled. He enjoys his work. He's his father. He lives with him, and he loves his father dearly. And as he says at one point in the book, in fact, a couple times he'll say, "Well, there's nobody." He says, "I have no enemies. Why would anybody want to harm me? I haven't done anything to harm anyone else." And so he starts off naively innocent. He doesn't realize that there are people that will harm him, even though he's never done anything to them. There are evil people in this world, and now the one of the arches, I think, in this whole book is that he starts off kind of naively feeling as if, hey, the world is good, life is good, I like everybody
He's
likes
young,
me.
He's happy, yeah.
Yeah, why would there's no reason for anyone to hurt me. And so, of course, he's completely defenseless. He's completely trusting. And then, of course, the world's going to hit him between the eyes, and he's going to go through a very dark period of anger at God and suicidal thoughts and wanting to just escape the pain and the disappointment and the rage of discovering that there are evil people that would conspire against him. And a lot of it is out of greed and out of envy. In fact, he'll eventually meet a wise person that says, you have to understand, when you're just happily living your life, there's going to be some miserable people out there that envy you for what you have. And rather than saying, well, I just need to be a hardworking, skilled, kind, nice person like that person, and maybe I'll have a similar kind of life, they just envy you and try to take what you have. And they use evil means to get what you got through noble means. And so what's going to happen with Edmund is that he's going to kind of go from one extreme kind of to the other, where he becomes a very brooding, angry, very cunning kind of person that plots and has a very cynical eye toward humanity, and and learns very much how to toy with these people. He was such an innocent victim to begin with, and then he becomes so masterful at working with people and manipulating them that he ends up pulling their strings and plays with them and to devastating results in their lives. And he has to somehow kind of come through all that journey to say, well, what do I like what I've become here? What have I become? And I think we've talked about this a couple of weeks ago in a podcast about just shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. You don't want to be just so naive that you're just constantly being victimized, but at the same time, do you want to become this hardened person that just looks at everyone in their ugliest sort of
with suspicion
form? And so that's one of the books. Of course, he's lied about, he's set up, and the next thing he knows, he's taken to a dark prison. He trusts a judge that he thinks is trustworthy, and then that's a huge mistake on his part. And basically, he's put away into a solitary confinement in the worst possible prison for 14 years. And so for 14 years, this young man watches the prime of his youth spent in misery and alone. And it just seems completely hopeless. And there's just all the avenues of justice seem to have just been unavailable to him. And it seems as hopeless as it could possibly be. And of course, no one knows where he's been sent. No one knows where he's been exiled. No one can help him. Even his fiancée eventually just assumes he must be dead, and eventually marries the very person that betrayed Edmund and caused him to go to jail.
Yeah.
She doesn't know that. She doesn't know what her husband has done, but she just assumes, and she's in a place where she needs someone to care for her, and she finally just marries someone else. And of course, everybody moves on with their life, and Edmund toils away in a prison, and goes through all the journey of anger and hopelessness and so on. And then, of course, in like classic literature fashion, really miraculously, he comes across an abbey who is considered crazy, and he's in jail, and he keeps trying to tell people that he can give them a fabulous fortune if they'll just release him, or they'll just work out a deal. And he's this impoverished person that everyone just assumes is crazy. And even Edmund doesn't like to talk about that, because he thinks, hey, pretty nice guy. He's kind of a little loony when it comes to this fortune he says he has, but otherwise a nice guy. But eventually Edmund begins to sense that this guy's telling the truth. He's still not sure if that treasure is there anymore, because it's on an island that this guy's not been to for a long time. But they begin to have this relationship, and for really a decade or so, this guy, the older man, just keeps pouring his wisdom into Edmund and teaching him. This uneducated sailor is getting this world-class education and training.
He learned several languages, I think.
Yeah, just, all they've got is all day long, and he's eager to learn. And of course, he's also intrigued with the idea of, if I could ever get out of here and find out what's happened to me. And of course, this wise man helps Edmund start to put the pieces together and start to figure out who has betrayed him and how it's been done. And he starts to realize he does have enemies, and so in a really an amazing kind of story, he escapes, and maybe I won't spoil that, but it's a
daring escape.
It's certainly a picture of Christ in a sense. The death of one person becomes the freedom for someone else, and he finally does escape, and he makes his way eventually to this island and discovers this fabulous, enormous treasure. And it seems that a few years pass where he's putting everything in place. And for many, if you've ever just really felt aggrieved at someone that harmed you, mistreated you, and you thought to yourself, if I just had the wherewithal to get revenge, to just show them, put them in their place.
Yeah.
If I could just become their boss and fire them, or I could just, have this power somehow. And that's essentially every person's dream who's ever been bullied or mistreated, is having the ultimate power to get revenge and to teach people a lesson that have done something wrong. And that's essentially the story of Monte Cristo. Is all of a sudden he's got all the money and power and influence that he could ever need to get revenge. And so he spends a good decade or more preparing and putting everything in place and studying and learning and discovering all the weak places and all the dirty laundry of his enemies. And then the book picks up where he just begins to just very meticulously work out his plan to ruin, to devastate the very people that ruined his life. And it's a fascinating story of, it raises, of course, as a classic book will do, it raises a number of issues. And, one is just how much do you let other people drive your life? Do you want to spend, how many people have we known that were driven to prove their dad was wrong, that I will amount to something? My dad always said I was worthless, no good. Or my dad just left home and showed no interest in me, and so he must not have thought I had any value, and I'll show him wrong. Or just lots of examples where people have spent most of their life trying to prove something or to get even with someone, and you think, what a sad way to let someone else be the driving force in your life and what you do. And that's largely what this guy does. Is everything he does is ultimately calculated in revenge. And of course, he sees it. The other thing that's interesting is he sees, and he'll say this, there's a number of quotes where he talks about basically being the providence of God, that God, he feels that that's God's calling, is to bring justice against evildoers, and that God's justice needs to punish people for their evil. And so he sees very much that what he's doing is for a righteous cause. Yeah. And again, what a temptation that can be.
Yeah.
To think that we're, because of, I really hate people who do that, and so I feel like God has called me to put those people in their place and to punish them. And of course, at a certain point in this book, one of the characters, all the characters that he came after, all end up in dire straits of one way or another. And at one point, it just says that at a certain point, when he sees how devastated one of those people becomes, when the Count fully brings his vengeance to bear, the Count of Monte Cristo is appalled at what's happened, and he staggers out into the street, and it says for the first time he wonders if he's gone too far, if he has. Of course, if you're sitting and brooding for a decade about what someone's done to you, it may well have been that it was a really bad thing they did, but a decade with no one to challenge you or to help you have any other perspective but your own, we can easily get to the point where we see them as this very, very close to being just like the devil and deserving all the hellfires that the devil has coming for him. And then sometimes when all of a sudden reality sets in, or we talk to others, we begin to realize, well, maybe they did deserve justice, but what we discover is only God is really capable of bringing true justice. And we've talked about this before, where, for instance, people might say, well, poor people deserve justice, and that's true. But then people will say, so the way we're going to give them justice is we'll be unjust to people with money. We'll take the money away from wealthy people and give it to the poor. Well, in a sense, you're not being completely just. Perhaps you're being just to the poor, but you're not being just to the rich. And so only God really, ultimately, you see in this book, is able to bring true justice to everyone. Ours is an imperfect justice at best. And what you also find in this book is that we tend to be attracted to bringing justice upon others, but we're not so keen on justice for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so at one point, the chief prosecutor, who has lied about Dante's and has sent him, exiled him to prison for 14 years, he makes statements about being an instrument of justice, and that's what he does. And yet he's been completely unjust when it came to his own looking out for his own interests. And so at the end, his life is just a series of contradictions where unknowingly he goes to basically push for someone to be condemned to death, and not knowing that the person he's condemning is his own son. And then telling his wife that she needs to basically kill herself because of her crimes. And then he realizes afterward, well, the only reason she's become so wicked is because she's been married to me. And so here's a person that has spent his whole life supposedly upholding justice, and then he realizes that his own family are a disaster around him, and that his life has had its own flaws and injustice. And so I think what it kind of shows us is, whenever you try to take the place of God, we do a sorry job of it.
Yeah.
And so there's just lots and lots of issues such as that cause you to reflect, to say, well, so, how do you go about pursuing justice in a way that it does not just become tarnished by our own prejudices and our own sins.
How do you remain true without, but still enacting justice? Well, let's take a break here, and we'll wrap up when we come back.
Hello, I'm Richard Blackaby. I'm the co-author of Experiencing God. And here at the Blackaby Bible Institute, we're offering an online class of Experiencing God that people can take from around the world. No one had any idea back in 1990, when Experiencing God was first published, that it would be so life-transforming, and that people would experience revival. They'd be set free from burdens they'd carried for years. I can't go anywhere in the world without people telling me how this material has changed their life. And so we offer it as the Blackabys, where we have all kinds of video resources, a live stream where you can submit live questions and get answers from myself and others, and just many different resources that will enhance your experience of Experiencing God. So I want to encourage you, if you've never taken the class before, or even if you have, the Blackaby Bible Institute will offer you more resources than you could have gotten anywhere else. And so we look forward to studying with you, and we're praying that it will change your life as you do.
Well, Richard, before we wrap up here, I will say one thing, that this is despite its length, it's a very well-written book, and you wouldn't think that for it being so long, but it really moves, and it's a really exciting read. As well as it opens up all of these issues about justice, about revenge, human nature. What were some maybe final thoughts that you had on the Count of Monte Cristo?
Well, it's interesting. These characters that early in the book they succumb to greed and envy and so on. Later, they all become very respectable people in society. They have these various titles, and they become very wealthy. And yet, you realize that so much of their character follows with them. When they're just kind of a young sailor themselves, or just a young person, they've got these character flaws. And you realize, well, now that they live in a mansion and they have lots of money, they basically still have those character flaws. You just cover them up better, but they're still people with issues they've never dealt with. And and if you don't deal with your issues, you end up with a lot of dark secrets that you just kind of carry along with you. And a couple of things that you notice too is, in one sense, I mean, the Count of Monte Cristo does pull some strings and manipulate things and work out a lot of stuff to his liking, but in another sense, a lot of the punishment, basically, he just plays on people's own flaws. He just lets them kind of reap what they've sown.
Yeah.
And a lot of his justice, in one sense, is just sort of exposing people to their own sins and making them pay for it.
Yeah, it's almost like he's not bringing the justice, but he's just setting the table so that they sort of fall on their own sword.
And there is
in
a
way.
sense in which you kind of reap what you sow, and he's just making sure that they do reap it. It looked like they were going to get away with not reaping what they'd sown. And I maybe just one or two final things. By the way, there are some for a book written in the 1840s. It does kind of touch on some lesbianism. It talks about drug use. There's a number of things in there that are probably a little edgy. Talking about some slavery and so on, and there's a lot of stuff there, and some
a lot of life.
Drug. He's kind of advocating drug use for like psychedelic hallucinogens and so on, and which is there's a lot of stuff. Even for an older book, it sort of touches on a lot of things.
He's French, so you can
give him a little
liberal there.
And I think maybe two or so things. Finally, like the Count, of course, is he's fabulously wealthy. He has there's of course a beautiful woman that loves him, but he's not sure that he one point says I'm concerned she'd just be bored with me, or I'm too old for her, or whatever. And the irony is that in his focus on trying to get revenge on people, he could have love himself with someone who loves him, but he almost misses it. Not till right at the end of that book, where he basically realizes this woman loves me, and he almost missed it. In fact, he's about to free her to leave him and to find happiness, and doesn't realize that she would find happiness with him. And what that says to me in part is, and I think the way the book was intended is, you've got all these people end up quite wealthy, and yet they're all unhappy. And it's very clear that money does not bring them happiness. Their kids aren't happy. Their marriages aren't happy. There's all kinds of tension. Even though they live in these beautiful homes and go to these wonderful parties and have all this influence and fame, they're still empty. They're greedy. They're envious. They're discontent. And even the Count is wealthier than all of them, and yet he struggles to be happy.
Well, he's just so eaten up by revenge that.
Yeah, and you think when you try to take the seat of God and play God in other people's lives, that's a role that's too big for anyone.
Yeah.
And you can get swept away into a life that's you were never meant to lead. And certainly we can be servants of God, but we need to be careful that we're not. And at one point he basically says that he was kind of like Satan and tempted to take the place of God, and it's just a role that was too big even for him. And so you look at that and you just think, at the end of the day, fabulous amount of wealth is not going to make someone happy if you miss love, if you miss relationships. And interestingly, one of the poorer families is actually the happiest ones. And whenever he goes, they don't live in a mansion like everybody else, but whenever he goes to their house, the Count will actually feel joy and forget about his problems for a while. And there's an interesting kind of theme that goes throughout the book, where a number of times it talks about this smile of the Count, but the people that see it will say it was terrifying. He's smiling, but they're terrified by the smile because it just seemed like a dark, brooding kind of smile that terrifies
Sinister,
people.
yeah.
And I've thought, well, how many people do you see that on the surface are smiling, but there's a lot of deep brewing anger, resentment, unforgiveness just below the surface, and you can't hide it. It finds its way out, and so it's one of those books that, by the very end, it's like the Count is finally free. Justice has been served in a very thorough, devastating way upon all those who harmed him. But you realize at the same time, as you get to the end, you just think, but did he waste some good years of his life just trying to make sure that justice was served? And in one sense, would justice have been served anyway? I mean, in the sense that none of those folks were happy. They had a lot of problems already. They were reaping. But it kind of leaves you with to say, in an age in which there's a lot of injustice today, it doesn't mean you don't try to make the world better. But if it starts to be done out of hatred, out of resentment, it's just pretty hard to bring about justice when you're doing it out of resentment and anger and a sense of entitlement. Pretty hard to be the person then that brings justice to others.
Yeah, that's going to lead you down a dark path sooner or later. So, well, as I can attest, that this is a fantastic read, and I think these classic books, although they may not seem it on the surface, can be very helpful in illuminating some of human nature for other leaders who work with people. And I think it's a great sort of escape into a different world, a different time, but at the same time learn some very practical takeaways.
Yeah, it takes some time, whether it's a lot of times I'll try in the summer or during a holiday or maybe just in the evenings. Maybe instead of just watching a mindless sitcom for an hour or so in the evenings, take some time, just take a month or so, and just in the evenings read several more chapters of a classic book, and
eventually you too can say you've read a 1,278-page novel.
Yes.
So, with that, we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.